This is a PQRL Studios presentation.
Last October, a strange thing happened here at PQRL Studios. A thumb drive was mailed to us in a heavily padded package with no return address. It contained one text file and 25 audio files. The text file was a note to us here at the studio. It was short. It read, "Here is every episode of Brittlebone, Ohio. These episodes were originally released starting in July of 2021 and running through October of that year, before they were pulled from all streaming services. The events depicted in these files are true. When the episodes were removed from streaming platforms, they disappeared. They became impossible to find. You now have the only copies, and you alone have permission to redistribute these episode files, courtesy of the Sinclair estate." The 25 audio files on the thumb drive confirm what the note said. 25 episodes of a quote-unquote podcast project called Brittlebone, Ohio. At first listen, it sounds more audiobook than podcast, fully scored and scripted. In fact, the show's host, Chance Sinclair, pretty much states that it's an audiobook. For example,
"Welcome to Brittlebone, Ohio. My name is Chance Sinclair. I did grow up being obsessed with books like 101 of the World's Greatest Mysteries and 13 Haunted Tales to Curl Your Toenails. Those collections of little bite-sizable chapters about the spooky, mysterious stuff said to be going on in the world around us. This podcast project is cut from that same mold. It's about cataloging Brittlebone's strange places and legends, one chapter at a time, and exploring what truth might be at the bottom of all the strange claims."
But what unfolds over those 25 episodes becomes something bizarre and harder to define. For another example,
I'm not necessarily a person that believes in ghosts, but I do believe in evil, and I know what we saw there.
And it wasn't just like, oh no, I'm scared for my life. It wasn't that type of scary. It was like it was creeping in my bones scary.
Jeez.
of course, we did not release the episodes. We assumed the thumb drive had been sent to other publishing and podcast studios as part of a viral marketing campaign. But slowly, we came to discover nobody else ever got a mysterious thumb drive. No one outside our studio had heard of Brittlebone, Ohio. And from everything we could find, the show never existed. It was never pulled from streaming services because it had never been on streaming services. If it was a marketing campaign, it was a bad one, because we couldn't find a Chance Sinclair that made audiobook podcasts, and we couldn't find a Sinclair estate that claimed responsibility for shipping around cryptic thumb drives. So for the past year, the show has been a fun little subject of heavy debate here at PQRL Studios. What exactly is it? Is it a hoax or an art project? Is it a mixtape or crop circle in audio form? What we finally settled on is that Brittlebone, Ohio is our series release for this October. After sorting through some legal things to make sure we're all good to publish these episodes, PQRL Studios is now pretty pleased to bring you the program called Brittlebone, Ohio, in its original format, as it was delivered to us via cryptic hard drive. Disclaimer: some select things have been censored to preserve privacies, though please note that apart from the rare censoring, everything you hear is embedded in the audio files. While the note written by the alleged Sinclair estate claims the events of these episodes are true, we would like to issue a statement of confidence that the project is a work of fiction, and that all references to real people, events, locations, and entities are intended only to give this fiction a sense of reality. We issue this statement with confidence because the town of Brittlebone, Ohio, to the best of our knowledge, does not exist.
A fair warning, this podcast project will, at first, sound like a true crime story. Because in this first episode, we will be covering a true crime. Actually, multiple crimes that happened in the same place at the same time. But please be aware up front that this is not a true crime-focused show. This is a podcast project about the place where those crimes happened. A place that has become a bubbling cauldron of strange claims. A place where, if you're trying to cover a true crime or true anything else, the truth here seems to get murky. And some would say things start to get weird. How weird exactly? Well, to set the stage for you just a bit, this place is home to more than just a podcastable true crime. It's also home to a grim, fairy tale-esque legend of devoured children. A genuinely well-documented history of exploding human adults. And then there are the decades and decades of allegations that its foggy, forested river valley is full of ghosts, and some believe things worse than ghosts. But before we get to all of the weird, we first need to start with the true crime. An honest warning, a good amount of what you're going to hear is absolutely true. And a good amount of what you're going to hear is digging into that place where the capital T truth of things dissolves into things believed, things rumored, and things left unknown. As the name of this project would suggest, this place is called Brittlebone, Ohio. On October 3rd, 2001, a phone call was placed to 911 dispatch around 3 p.m. in the afternoon in the small, strangely named town of Brittlebone, Ohio. The man who called did not give his name, but claimed that the fire department was needed at 816 Wayward Court, a home address. When emergency units arrived at the scene, they found no immediate signs that anything was wrong with the house at 816 itself. Instead, what they found was a pillar of black smoke rising from somewhere in the woods behind the homes of Wayward Court. On that sunny Wednesday afternoon, the first chill of fall had crept into the air, and the leaves had begun their turning to orange and red and brown, and most importantly, had started to fall, dead, dry, and brittle, to the October forest floor. Perfect kindling and a detail of grave concern to the emergency responders entering the forest to find the source of the smoke. At the house at 816 Wayward Court, all attempts to knock on the front door went unanswered. At the scene, there had originally been some belief amongst first responders that the 911 call had simply been a tip about the fire, that the anonymous caller had only given the house address so that when emergency services arrived, they would be able to see the smoke in the forest and locate the flames. The thought had been, if the anonymous caller had been a resident of 816, then they would have answered all the knocking and banging on the front door. In the aftermath of that October afternoon, a new theory was quick to form around town. A theory that suggested something closer to the opposite may have been the truth. That the fire had only been set to draw attention to what was waiting to be found inside the house. That this anonymous 911 call had been placed only when the caller realized that the fire hadn't done its job, that nobody in the relatively isolated cul-de-sac of Wayward Court had noticed the smoke in the middle of the broad daylight of a weekday afternoon. To this day, the identity of this caller remains a mystery. At the time, there were theories around town, and as the story spread, details emerged and opinions formed, and it seemed like most folks aware of the case came to believe that the caller had been John Barker. John was a 49-year-old owner of a construction company from Denver, Colorado, who had moved to Brittlebone and into the house at 816 2 years prior to the afternoon in question. On that Wednesday, October 3rd, the house at 816 was still listed as John Barker's mailing address. And when emergency services finally forced open the door to the home, John Barker's body was the first of the bodies discovered inside. The body of John Barker had been found on the living room couch. He had been killed by a single gunshot directly to the forehead. Coroner reports confirmed trace amounts of gasoline were present on his skin and clothing. An empty plastic gas can was found, set on the dining room table just inside the back door of the home. John may or may not have dialed 911, but investigators were certain he had set the fire in the woods. At the top of the stairs leading to the second floor of the home, just outside the doorway to the master bedroom, sprawled the body of John's wife, Susan Barker. She had been killed by a single gunshot to the temple. In her hand was a .38 caliber revolver. Coroner reports confirmed her fingers tested positive for gunshot residue matching the gun, and the gun was confirmed as the weapon that had fired the 2 lethal rounds. official reports concluded that this, the only murder in the small town's history at the time, had been a murder-suicide with a side of arson. Legally speaking, the case had been cut and dry. The culprits were known, and the sentences already passed. All guilty parties were deceased. Beyond the town of Brittlebone, the Barker family case never became more than a blip on the radar. There were two clearly guilty parties, no lingering court case drama, and it's sad to say, but there was nothing particularly memorable about the causes of death. This was a case of a very ordinary American death by domestic gunfire. And so that brisk, sunny Wednesday afternoon came and went, and whatever horror played out in a little house in a little town was swallowed up by time, a family's destruction only good for the briefest of flashes in the news cycle. And yet, amongst some in Brittlebone, whispering about the case continued, because in Brittlebone, it wasn't just the anonymous phone call, or the head-scratching fire, or even the shock of a married couple's sudden death. It was that all of this had happened in the cul-de-sac at the end of Wayward Court. Even in a town with a spooky name like Brittlebone, a river town that is fittingly rumored to be a bubbling cauldron of essential Midwestern strangeness, it's this cul-de-sac at the end of Wayward Court, sitting at the bottom of a valley, surrounded by forest, next to a river that has earned a nickname bowing to its strangeness. This cul-de-sac is known locally as the Wayward Circle. In part, of course, because a cul-de-sac is essentially the shape of a circle, but more importantly, the nickname stuck as a kind of folklorian nod to the Bermuda Triangle, a place where some locals swore the town's strangeness condensed, a place where unexplainable things were said to happen in the homes, in the forest, and in the river. And this regional lore took on a new life when a major character in its legends, the house at 816 itself, gained a body count. My name is Chance Sinclair, and on Wednesday, October 3rd, 2001, I was 13 years old, had just gotten home from a long day in the 7th grade, and at around 3 p.m., I was warming up a Pop-Tart. Now, I still have this very specific Pop-Tart memory 20 years later because when I heard the first loud popping sound, I'd been in the living room of my mom's house playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, and I remember the bolt of panic that jolted through me because I thought something had gone horribly wrong with the toaster. So I threw the controller down and ran into the kitchen to find the toaster fully intact, toasting my Pop-Tart. And that was where I was standing when I heard the second loud popping noise. And I realized then that the sound was coming from somewhere outside. I didn't know in that moment what had happened, what that loud popping noise had been, but soon enough came the sirens and the flashing lights down the hill of Wayward Court and into my cul-de-sac. The scene became seared into my mind for two big reasons. One, I learned that what I thought had been my breakfast pastry exploding had actually been my neighbors across the street being shot in the head. And two, in what was a huge deal for a 13-year-old, I was interviewed by police over the incident. And what I learned during my own interview was that at 3 p.m. on that particular Wednesday, right smack in the middle of the work week, nobody else had been at home in any of the other 6 houses in the Wayward Circle. According to the officers, only me and the Barker family had been in the cul-de-sac at their time of death. And something about that bit of news dropped a little weight down in my 13-year-old Pop-Tart-filled stomach. Something about being the only person to have heard a family's final moments, even from a distance, and even have nothing to do with it. Something about that fact made the Barker family case stick with me. And from everything I remember about that afternoon and its immediate falling into obscurity, there's always been one thing very strange to me about the case. In over 20 years since the incident, despite the insane saturation levels of true crime and paranormal content being pumped out over the past few years, I've never seen or heard the Barker family case talked about the way that us kids talked about it in school at the time. This is wild to me because in those 20 years, I haven't come across a single bit of news coverage or media coverage about the case that mentioned it had occurred in a house locally known for the rumors that it was haunted. And this is fair on some level, considering paranormal rumor doesn't typically find its way into serious news reports. But even the paranormal coverage of the town never mentions the Barker case. And the one true crime blog I found that covers the Barkers clings to the unsolved element of that anonymous 911 call. All the coverage I found fails to mention the fire. It fails to mention the reputation of the house at 816. It fails to even touch on the alleged strangeness of the Wayward Circle that the house sits in. And it fails to mention that beyond that circle, the small river town of Brittlebone, Ohio, has quietly cemented itself as a beacon of strange Midwest American lore. Perhaps above all of this even, in all the coverage about the town's claims to strange fame, I've never once encountered a single reference to the strangest detail about the town's documented 2001 murder-suicide. A detail that, interestingly enough, had nothing to do with the infamous house at 816 itself. Rather, it had everything to do with what had been set on fire in the woods. The thing that had been left burning at the bottom of that pillar of black smoke.